The scene started in a gangster headquarters that was also used as a drug manufacturing place. Not long after, a man named Damien came to the head of the gangster. He came to get the drugs that he would sell later, but the boss said that currently, one of his men had betrayed him, and after he told the characteristic of the accused, it turned out that the boss had accused Damien himself. He then asked all his men there to kill Damien, but he managed to beat all of them. Damien then approached the boss, who was badly injured and about to arrest him. Turned out Damien was a secret agent who had been undercover all the time. The boss, who was dying, then told Damien that he and his men had found out where his family lived. Hearing that, Damien rushed to his house to check on his wife, only to find out that she was already been murdered. It turned out that the gangsters had killed his wife before trying to kill him. A month later, Damien was still mourning his wife's death. He spent every day drinking. He also had resigned from his job as the undercover agent. One day, his friend named Simon contacted him to discuss about something important. Simon asked him to come to his house tonight. Long story short, that night, Damien came to Simon's house and had dinner with his family. While having dinner there, Simon said that many of his students at school were addicted to drugs named fentanyl. In fact, in the past few months, many of his students had died from overdoses. When both of them were in the kitchen, Simon said that he was sure that the drug distribution was carried out by someone from the school. He asked Damien to help him solve this case, considering that Damien was very experienced. Damien, who was now retired, then asked Simon to report the case to the police, but Simon replied that he had reported it to the police several times, but until now, there had been no follow-up information whatsoever. Damien, who was still traumatized by his wife's death, refused Simon's request. The conversation turned out to be overheard by Simon's child, Camel. Camel was a high school student from the school where Simon taught. The next night, Damien was seen visiting the convenience store to buy some drinks, but several thugs in the area approached him and tried to beat him. Damien casually beat all of them one by one. Meanwhile, Simon was seen sneaking into a warehouse that he believed was a place where the gangsters stored the drugs, but when he was about to enter the warehouse, Simon was found out and was killed that night. The next day, Damien accidentally heard the news on TV saying that Simon was now dead. The police assumed that Simon was the dealer under the guise of a teacher who sold the drugs to students at the school. The police also assumed that Simon's death was caused by suicide. Upon hearing the news, Damien immediately felt guilty for refusing Simon's request to uncover the drug case at his school. Damien was sure that Simon was deliberately scapegoated by the perpetrators that day. Damien went to Simon's house and tried to calm Simon's wife, saying that Simon was innocent and he was not a dealer. Then a policeman who was already there insulted Camel, Simon's son, as the son of a dealer. That thing triggered Camel to assault the police, but Damien immediately ordered the police to release Camel. A few weeks later, Damien planned to apply to be a teacher at the place where Simon used to teach. He intended to solve the drug case and prove that Simon was innocent. Arriving at school, Simon was immediately welcomed by the principal because, by chance, the school was currently in need of a teacher. The principal said that he wanted to restore the reputation of the school because since Simon was considered to be distributing drugs in his school, the school had a bad reputation. The principal also explained that he had hired a security agent so that no one else could distribute the drugs at the school. Shortly thereafter, a woman named Agata came into the office. Agata and Damien immediately became acquainted. The principal then told her to take Damien to look around and introduce him to other teachers. The next day, Damien entered the class to start teaching the students, but it was seen that the students there did not respect him at all. Even one of the students named Roy acted arrogantly in front of Damien. He was reminded several times by Damien, but he even fought back. Luckily, when Agata and the security agent, whose name is Kmielski, came there and immediately kicked Roy out. At night, when Agata was about to go home, Roy showed up with some of his friends. It turned out that Roy had a liking for Agata and now he intended to rape her. Luckily, before it happened, Damien came with another teacher and single-handedly paralyzed them all. The teacher who saw Damien's amazing battle skills felt very amazed at him. After the incident, Roy was arrested by a bunch of delinquents from the same school. The leader of the bullies was a student named Jaziek. Not long after, someone came using a motorbike who turned out to be Chmielewski. Along with Jaziek and his goons, he was the one ruling the drug dealers in school. They caught Roy and told him that his action was risky and could make them caught. Without any hesitation, they beat Roy and even broke his leg because they did not want anyone to find out about their business. The next day, all the teachers saw Damien's footage from the security camera and were amazed by him. The principal also thanked Damien for saving Agata. Later, before going to his class, Damien was approached by Chmielewski, who asked who Damien really was. Damien only said that he was nothing more than a history teacher. When Damien entered the class, it turned out that all the students had found out that Damien was very skilled in martial arts. The students then asked Damien to teach them martial arts during recess so they could defend themselves. When recess comes, the students were very enthusiastic about learning martial arts with Damien. Shortly after, Kamil, who had just returned to school that day after his father died, showed up. In the locker room, Damien approached him. He immediately became angry with Damien because of what he had done to his father, for ignoring his father's plea for help with the case that caused his father's death. Damien tried to calm him down by saying that his intention of becoming the teacher in this school replacing his father was to prove that his father, Simon, is innocent. At the night, Damien had dinner with Agata, who turned out to have grown an attraction to him. When Damien was about to take another drink, he accidentally saw several men harassing visitors there. Damien immediately faced the men to stop them, but they refused. A fight between them broke and Damien, with his amazing battling skill, defeated them easily. Agata, who saw the fight, grew more interested in him. She even invited him to her apartment. When they arrived, they almost had an intimate night until when the memory of Damien's dead wife came rushing to him, he stopped himself at the very last minute. He was still unable to get over the loss of his wife and decided to leave from there without any notice. When he was walking home, he accidentally saw one of the delinquents from the school transacting over drugs. Damien immediately approached them and asked where he got the drugs, but he was too feared to tell the truth. He didn't want to say it because he was afraid of getting beaten up by his boss. The next day, one of the students named Emilia was seen arguing with Jaziek. She was angry because Jaziek had made her best friend a drug addict, and without any hesitation, Jaziek and his men bullied her. Suddenly Kamil showed up. He couldn't stand someone bullying her and decided to take matters into his hands. He asked them to leave her alone, but they instead beat him up. After they finished, Jaziek threatened to beat anyone who tried to tell the teacher about that. In the class, Damien saw bruises all over Kamil's face. He immediately asked the person who had beaten him, but Kamil was too feared to tell the truth and instead told him that he had just fallen over something and bruised his face. Emilia then said that they would not tell because they were afraid of being beaten up. One of the students then asked Damien to teach them self-defense so they would not continue to be afraid. Hearing this, Damien thought that it would be a good idea to teach the students some self-defense skills, as they were often bothered by the goons and the drug dealers. He told them to come to a warehouse after school, and from there, together with the students, Damien started a training arena to teach the students various lessons related to self-defense on a regular basis. He also found out that Agata had grown bitter towards him after the night he left her unnoticed. She kept a professional relationship between them and nothing more. Every night, Damien continuously monitored the movements of the delinquents, including Jaziek, until one day, Damien found drugs that were ready to be distributed by them. Damien immediately lured the police to come there, and some of Jaziek's men were finally caught. Unfortunately, Damien was not aware that Chmielewski was also watching for him. One day, when Damien had just finished training his students in some self-defense, suddenly he was visited by several masked people who intended to kill him. Once again, with his impeccable hand-to-hand combat skill, he managed to beat them up battered. They were not tough enough to beat him alone. The next day, he found out that the group of men that tried to beat him was Chmielewski's goons, thanks to the bruises on their faces. Jaziek, who had enough of Damien's behavior towards them, came to Chmielewski and then told him that he had an idea to get rid of Damien. They set up a made-up story of how Damien had sexually abused Emilia. They came to Emilia's house and threatened her to pretend that she had been harassed by Damien or they would kill her father. She had no other choice but to do what they told her. The next day at school, when Damien was about to enter the class, he was prevented by the principal and Agata. The principal said that he couldn't believe that Damien could harass Amelia. The principal with a heavy heart had to suspend him for some time. He then ordered Kmielski and his men to drive Damien out of the school. At night, Damien sneaked into Amelia's place and asked why she framed him for harassing her. She then confessed that she had to do that for the sake of her father's safety. She was threatened by Jaziek and his goons. Hearing that, Damien then came to the hospital to visit Roy, who had previously been beaten up by Kmielski and his goons. He asked Roy about the drugs, where they were made, and how they were brought to school. Roy, who had been fed up with Kmielski and his goons, then told him that the drugs were not brought to school. It was made inside the school in the first place. Hearing that, Damien rushed to the school to find evidence about what Roy had previously told him. Inside the school, he saw someone walking into the laboratory room. He secretly went into the laboratory room where at that time, they were concocting the drugs. Surprisingly, the chemistry teacher at school, Stefan, was the one who made the drugs. He then saw some of the goons carrying the drugs to a van to be transported somewhere. He immediately took a picture and then followed the car. It turned out that the car took him to the pier. Unfortunately, when Damien was about to check the van, he was caught by some of the goons, but thankfully, he managed to beat them. After that, he immediately contacted Agata and also the school principal to meet immediately. When they finally met, Damien explained that he had just seen the chemistry teacher making the drugs, then Kmielski and 2 of his goons brought the drugs to the pier. At that very moment, the principal called the people that Damien mentioned and asked them about the drugs. Stefan, the chemistry teacher, reasoned that he was cleaning the lab at that time and then told Kmielski and his men to take the remaining chemical substances to the pier to throw them away. Hearing the alibi from those people, Damien couldn't do anything because he didn't have complete evidence. The next night, Agata suddenly came to Damien's house. Damien thought that she was still disappointed with what had happened between them and even thought that he had harassed Amelia, but instead, Agata told him that she already knew that Damien was innocent. It turned out that previously, Agata had visited Amelia's house and had been told the truth. Damien then told her the reason why he left her before. Damien actually told her that he liked her, but at that time, the memory of his dead wife came to him. Damien also revealed his true identity to Agata. After that, the 2 of them were determined to reveal the drug distribution in their school that Damien had been investigating. The first thing they did was to meet the chemistry teacher and interrogated him. Damien asked him where the drugs were stored, but before Stefan said anything, Kmielski came with his bike and shot Stefan to death. The next night, Agata met Damien again and said that she had a notebook belonging to Simon. Inside the book was written a map that led to a warehouse. Agata was sure that the warehouse was where all the drugs were stored. At that moment, Damien and Agata rushed to the warehouse. However, without them noticing, Kmielski was watching them all the time. When they got to the warehouse, Damien was immediately confronted by Kmielski's goons. He beat them for good and moved to find evidence. Finally, they found a pile of drugs that were ready to be distributed, but suddenly, Damien and Agata were surrounded by Kmielski, Jaziek, and his goons. A shocking thing happened because the mastermind behind all these crimes was the principal. He dared to reveal himself because he thought he had cornered both Damien and Agata, but he was wrong. He said to Damien that he and his goons would beat him to death. Surprisingly, not long after that, Camel and all the students who had been trained by Damien showed up. A big fight broke out between the drug dealer goons and the students. The students managed to fight back. In this incident, Camel even managed to beat Jaziek, the leader of the student bully. Meanwhile, Damien himself dueled with Kmielski. Even though he looked buffed and strong at school, it turned out that he was no match for Damien. He was easily beaten by Damien. Damien then confronted the principal, who at that time was holding Agata hostage. When the principal was off guard, Agata managed to let go of him. Damien took the chance to beat the principal, but when he was holding Agata, he was off guard and was shot by the principal. Thankfully, the bullet only managed to injure his arm, but when the principal was about to shoot him again, Camel showed up and dropped a lot of bottles to make the principal meet his death. Not long after that, the police came to the scene to take care of the situation. They finally managed to cleanse Simon's reputation.